Tomorrow is the last day to enter the Conservative leadership race, but the real test is April 29th, the deadline to pay the $300,000 entry fee and to turn in 500 party member signatures in order to get onto the ballot. So far, 3 people have hit that bar to become verified candidates: Jean Charest, Leslyn Lewis, and Pierre Poilievre. MP Scott Aitchison, former MP and Deputy Leader Leona Alleslev, Brampton Mayor Patrick Brown, they're all also running, as is BC MP Mark Delton. Also vying to lead the Conservatives is Roman Baber. He's an independent Ontario MPP. Hi, Mr. Baber. Good to meet you. Thanks for making time for us tonight.
It's great to be with you.
In your campaign videos, you say you're not running on lockdowns or passports. You're running against radical left-wing ideology, censorship, and cancel culture. That's a direct quote. But just a cursory glance at your social media presence and of your last 20 tweets, almost half were pandemic-related. If you are looking to move society past the divisions you say mandates and passports created, why are you still focusing on them?
Well, we must appreciate that more than 3 million Canadians are still unable to board a plane. Many Canadians are still losing their jobs because they made a different medical choice. So I don't believe that we're out of the woods, regretfully, and it's important to stand up for the rights of all Canadians. My run is predicated on restoring Canada's democracy. I'm of the view that it's the censorship, the cancel culture, and the inability to have a frank discussion that led to the pandemic response of the last couple of years. Having sensible conversation is not just good for democracy, it's also good for public policy. And I think that we should continue to talk about the erosion of Canada's democracy.
With respect, when you talk about the erosion of democracy and this level of censorship, what specifically are you referring to? Because I know that you, for example, were kicked out of caucus, but you still remained an MPP. You're on mainstream media right now, and you have been a number of times. You're very vocal and free to say what you want on social media. So what censorship are you speaking of?
Well, we're seeing a bill working its way through Parliament that's going to regulate the use of the internet. We're seeing the government picking winners and losers among Canada's media and the ability to be considered and in fact, potentially be on the air. But as I said, we're still seeing an unprecedented erosion in our democracy, in that many Canadians are still unable to live an everyday life, whether it's by having access to transportation or being able to maintain their jobs. We're also seeing regulators, professional regulators, namely, censor professionals, therefore inhibiting opinion. And we're seeing social media censorship, something that we haven't seen to this extent before. And finally, with respect to my own experience, I think I've articulated a sensible opinion that we should weigh the cost of our public health response, the toll, into our public policy planning. And regretfully, that meant that I had to leave the government caucus. I think that government and our society in general would benefit from greater conversation, not less conversation.
And certainly my job isn't to defend the government in that move, and I understand the concerns that you have around it. But they set forth a set of policies. You didn't agree with them. They felt that caucus support was something that was germane to pushing their agenda forward, to implementing things that they thought, for whatever reason, were in the public good. And isn't it their right to then say to you, okay, your values don't align with ours? They're not saying you can't speak your mind. They certainly aren't saying you shouldn't be on social media. So I'm just wondering if that's the most accurate way to put it.
Look, I don't propose to litigate what transpired a year and a half ago. Doug Ford removed me from the Conservative caucus after me speaking out against the lockdowns, having heard from literally thousands of constituents who are worried about the mental health of their children, that are concerned that their surgeries were being canceled, that were concerned that their cancer screenings are being missed. That's in fact one of my strategies to unite the Conservative Party, is to allow for further discussion within the Conservative Party, whether it's folks that are concerned about passports or mandates, or Conservatives that are concerned about social issues. They have a room in the Conservative Party regardless of their views. And I don't think that you can restore democracy in Canada without first restoring democracy in the Conservative Party. And I think that same goes for the provincial party.
I guess what I'm trying to get at, and I'm not trying to take away from the discussion taking place, and I'm not here to relitigate lockdowns, no lockdowns, but I listen to so many of your campaign videos and the tweets that you're putting out, and And this idea that there's this massive amount of censorship out there, the left-wing, hateful ideology that you say you're fighting. I'm not sure what you're exactly specifically pointing to. I don't know, you're saying that society needs to move past divisions, but you're articulating that there's a huge cleavage and that people on that side who are articulating, maybe they're in favor of lockdowns, maybe they're a little bit worried about some things. You're sort of saying that, you're saying that equates to censorship or a hateful ideology. I'm confused about how you get to that point.
Okay, well, we've seen in the last couple of years that there's been a push against diversity of opinion, particularly as it pertains to Canada's public health response. We know that doctors that are speaking out against lockdowns or believing that perhaps there's a better way to address our public health concerns have been gagged. We know that the regulator, Ontario's regulator, for instance, has come out and said that doctors are not permitted to oppose or question public health measures. I don't believe that that's good for our democracy or good for public health. We're also seeing a lot of censorship on social media. There's no question that whether it's censorship on Instagram or on Twitter, deletion of accounts, shadow banning, those are regretfully practices that Canadians have become exposed to in the last couple of years. Look, I'm a lawyer and a legislator, and of course, I very much ask everyone to abide by the rule of law. We know what the lines are in terms of speech and lines that should not be crossed, and we ought to respect them. But that doesn't mean that we should erode professionals or the right of politicians or well-meaning doctors, business leaders, union leaders from speaking out against government policy. We've seen that in Ottawa just a couple of weeks ago, right? We saw the federal government using the Emergency Act for the first time in its existence to crack down on what was largely a peaceful protest. I think we should encourage opinion and dissent, not discourage it.
Okay, I'll just quickly point out, because I do want to ask you about other issues, that I understand your point about there being protesters here who were peaceful. There were also blockades taking places at major arteries of economic trade that were unlawful. So I do want to ask you about other issues, though, and specifically around things that you've said in the past few weeks about the budget. You criticized the level of spending of the federal government. What would you cut?
So we've seen an unprecedented level of spending. We've spent more than $500 million, $500 billion in the last 2 years. And I'm not sure that Canadians got much value for it. We're seeing an unprecedented inflationary levels on the Canadian loonie. And I think that makes the cost of living in Canada completely unaffordable. But if I may just come back to your point quickly, of course, police should enforce existing bylaws, but there was absolutely no necessity in the declaration of emergency or riot police against bystanders on the Hill. That was unacceptable. No one regretfully actually discussed the issue, which are the issue dispute, which are the mandates. You shouldn't force someone to choose between their ability to put food on the table and potentially making a healthcare choice that they didn't want to make. The Prime Minister did not have courage to even meet with them. And on February 18th, when the government cracked down on protesters, we did not see any rioting, any violence, any guns, or any resistance. The government tried to demonize the protesters, but on February 18th, I think Canadians saw this was a truly peaceful movement.
Okay, just to parse that out, because first of all, you didn't answer my question about what you'd cut, so we'll get back to that in a second. Again, when you're talking about the nature of the protest, there were protests and the convoy was here for 3 weeks. So it's not like those actions were taken immediately by the federal government. There were a number of citizens in Ottawa who vocalized the concern over the effect that it was having on their lives. A number of businesses, in fact, in the downtown Ottawa core who could not operate because of what was taking place. So I take all your points on that, but it's not necessarily as black and white as you're portraying it. And second of all, like I said, you didn't answer my question about your criticism of the level of government spending. I understand the criticism, but what would you cut that the government is spending on? For example, would you roll back the childcare plan?
What I think is we've seen in the last couple of years, aside from the waste that generally we're seeing on all levels of government, waste that have been subjected to at Queen's Park for the last 4 years, I think that it's important to understand that we simply can't continue to spend beyond our means. We have over a 1.2 trillion debt. We're paying $2 billion of interest a month. With rising interest rates, we are essentially robbing future generations. My suggestion is that we have to look at when I when I roll out my economic plan, I will suggest that, first of all, we should limit all discretionary spending to the rate of inflation, not higher than that. We should consider looking at the way that government interacts with the provinces and look at potentially the formula, consider needs of various other provinces. But most importantly, I think that we need to look at the revenue side of the ledger as well, and not by raising taxes, but specifically by unleashing Canada's economic potential through a very robust plan for natural resources. I think that Canada's natural resources are a blessing, and I look forward to allowing Canadians to safely and responsibly developing Canada's natural resources to help our economic bottom line.
So if I understand you correctly, you'll take a second look at discretionary spending and you'll hope that economic growth leads to increased revenues. That certainly won't balance the budget on its own.
I think that you got to bring a different culture of accountability to government. I think that that is something that I've done as a commercial litigator and as an insurance litigator. In fact, I started out as a bankruptcy lawyer. And I think it's important for Canadians to appreciate that we are robbing future generations of opportunity, of having the same opportunity that we've been accustomed to. I fall on the tail end of the millennials. I'm not sure whether we're going to have a solvent CPP. I'm not sure whether we're going to be able to keep up with the healthcare investments that we need to make in order to catch up with aging population. Unfortunately, no, it's not easy to be in the business of government. And at the same time, I think we have a responsibility to Canadians.
Respectfully, though, and I take your point. I understand on the amount, for example, of money that's being spent when it comes to servicing the debt, and that there are concerns about the level of debt this country has taken on. But respectfully, you're identifying the problem. You're not saying how if you were Prime Minister, you'd solve it. The Liberals are already going to undertake 2 separate reviews of spending. That's so far the only thing you've told me you do to reduce spending. Otherwise, you're just banking on the economy growing and revenues going up. I'd point to revenues already going up by $24 billion from expectations just in this fiscal year, thanks to increased revenue from natural resources and higher income taxes because of economic growth. So really, what would you do any differently? Like, I think it's important for viewers, aside from your your viewpoint on lockdowns and democracy, to understand how you would deal with this problem that you keep identifying, but one that you have yet to offer a real tangible solution to.
Well, I'd look to bring a different culture to government. If I may indulge you with a quick story. When the Ministry of Health in Ontario was moving offices, they needed to add an extra station onto the floor plan. To do that, they needed to go and seek approval from the cabinet secretary, which in turn needed to seek approval from the chief of staff. That is unfortunately how business is done, not just at Queen's Park, but in Ottawa. We have remarkable inefficiencies in the system. We have
But can you get rid of multi-billion-dollar deficits by getting rid of inefficiencies? Is that accurate? Is that true?
I'm not necessarily talking about inefficiencies. I'm talking about culture, the culture of spending and the culture of accountability that we have in government. I'd also say that I'd be doing a test essentially considering, is this program, does it make sense for us to go deeper into debt, whether it's potentially foreign aid, something that I'd consider reviewing. But you are correct in that this is not going to be just dealt with by way of spending and by way of discipline. I'm of the view that we need to look at the revenue side of the equation, and that means unleashing Canada's natural resources. Okay, Mr. Baber, I'm out of time. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you so much. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.